Hello there, John Coturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. As per usual, thank you to everyone who makes it possible for me to live my vision every day, be you a client who allows me the privilege of entering into your life to help you with your goals, or as a supporter or a listener of the podcast. Thank you to everybody. Today I'm going to be discussing the topic of tough love, as it is often called, and specifically reflecting on whether or not it's actually effective in helping people to change their mental state. Now, before we begin, as usual, never take what you find on the internet as advice. If you have any concerns about yourself or someone else, please seek professional help. To start, let us define tough love as a more forceful way of trying to convince people to accept a simple solution to a psychological problem in this context. There are nuances to this issue, as there normally are, and let's start by pondering what are some of the examples of tough love. Often we've experienced these ourselves from either people close to us in our personal lives or in our professional lives, or perhaps even treating professionals in the health industry. You may hear lines such as, "Your problems aren't that bad. You know you can do better. You're overthinking things. You're just telling yourself that these things are problems. It's all in your head." Or "Chin up, life wasn't meant to be easy." And you'll hear some people referring to this rather dogmatically as logic over others' irrationality. They'll say, "You can't accuse me of being nasty. I'm just telling people what they need to hear. It's them who are exaggerating their problems and being irrational." There are some quite fine nuances to this issue. As I've said in the past, often when an individual has a type of psychological problem, whether it be a non-pathological issue or an issue that constitutes a mental illness, often the way that their mind is functioning and the way that they're behaving in response to that is inadvertently perpetuating or even creating the problem. That's not their fault. They're often completely unaware of it, but often that is also the objective truth. It's also true to say that ruminating doesn't work. Ruminating being constantly thinking about the problem in ways that aggravate the emotions associated with it, but don't actually solve the problem. Simply thinking about a problem and feeling horrible about it does not solve it, and yet it is often a symptom of mental illness or other psychological ailments, and so it is often a necessary goal to resist ruminating. It is also the case that, yes, the human mind often does distort what it absorbs from its environment. It is true that we often don't perceive objective reality. So often, yes, we do create problems in our mind. If we are to take this literally, hear that carefully, if we are describing the situation literally, then yes, we do invent problems, because sometimes how we think about a problem doesn't actually help us solve it. But the fact that the human mind often does this does not negate that humans are subjective creatures. We can go a long way to being more critical thinkers and more nuanced thinkers. We can go a long way to being very careful to acknowledge objective reality. We can go a long way to questioning ourselves, but we are never going to make the mind a perfectly objective machine that doesn't distort anything at any time. And you know what? We can't call people bad or dysfunctional because they make cognitive mistakes, because in reality, we all make them. And us telling people you're being irrational, you're inventing these problems in your mind, even though in a literal sense it may be true, it's not going to help anyone. And part of effectively helping people doesn't just involve understanding the objectivities of what a person is experiencing, but also understanding the subjectivities and understanding how to best work with that in a compassionate way. If you really want to help someone, you have to acknowledge that part of the reality is that people create their own reality. Even if it's not objective, and even if it's not necessarily a true reflection of the objective reality, effectively helping means knowing that you can't turn the brain magically into a perfectly objective machine that is always going to perceive reality in a perfectly objective sense. Think about how we think. It's an obscure question, but our cognition, our thinking, is abstract and it is subjective. How do you simply change the way you think? How do you visualize that? It's possible, but to suggest that someone do that, you have to actually be able to place it in concrete terms. That's called reification, which a concept that I've discussed extensively in my past work. We have to take the abstract, that is the thinking, and try to compare it to something concrete. We have to make attributions about it as if it is a physical phenomenon. We have to specifically define what the thoughts are and how we can change them, and to what we can change them, what the alternative thoughts are. That's why in psychotherapy we conduct psychoeducation. That means teaching our clients about how the mind works in a way that is accessible to them personally, because we're not taught metacognition. We're not taught how the mind works very often. We're not taught about how our minds can distort things. So we have to teach people first, this is why your brain might be thinking about this in a certain way. This is where its source is. And then you have to guide them through the process of examining, if you think about this way, what's going to happen? How do we examine the outcome? But what if we were to specify an alternative way of thinking about it? What would the outcome be? It's a highly nuanced and quite a gradual process. But the brain actually responds better with that type of treatment. As I've stated in the past, the brain actually responds differently when we show someone empathy, and the parts of the brain that are involved in complex thought and complex problem solving, and also regulating intense emotions, actually function better when we demonstrate empathy to someone. So if you really want to help someone change, being empathic and compassionate isn't just being nice to them, it is most certainly treating them with dignity, but it's also helping their brain to work in the way that it's designed to work. And that's why if we have to tell someone what they need to hear in therapy, if we have to face a difficult subject with them, such as how they may be contributing to the problem, we have to prime them first. We have to prepare them by gradually explaining this is how the mind works, and showing them that we understand how the problem is functioning and help them to understand how the problem is functioning, and then gradually introduce them to what their role is. Because they're more likely to actually want to help themselves if they receive it that way. And again, it's not lying, it's not feigning. Even if we are exaggerating information or distorting information in a way that is creating the problem for us, the fact that that is happening in and of itself is a problem. It's not our fault. We're not deliberately trying to create the problem. But the fact that it is happening at all and that we want to change it, that means that by definition it is a problem and that we deserve help to change it if we so choose to. Now, there have been a number of different types of events on which I've been reflecting recently that have brought to bear this particular topic. Recently, I've been fascinated by watching a lot of documentaries about how different countries train military recruits. And yes, those documentaries are often quite abridged in terms of how much of the happenings of military training bases they actually show. You certainly won't see recordings of what happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in those establishments. Obviously, they are edited so that you only see the most entertaining parts, which are more often than not the most intense parts of those events. But you do see a lot of tough love. You see a lot of people, often people who are only in their teens, being told, you need to do better. You see people being shouted at. You see people being given simple solutions. Change the way you do this. Change the way you think about it. You often don't see what help they're given in the process, which in many cases I'm assuming, there is help available. It's just that you don't see it because, again, there's only so much time that can be spent on a documentary. But you see people also reacting to it, and you see mature people break down and cry in the process. Again, there are nuances to this. You do see a lot of high performance in the military. You see people who are incredibly strong and resilient and who are willing to protect the people of their own countries. And you see people return from military service with great virtue. And I have absolute respect for people who are willing to make that sacrifice to defend the people of their own countries. It's also the case that demands are inevitable, that regardless of what's right or wrong, and regardless of the fact that wars and turmoil in the world are almost always human precipitated, bar for natural disasters, which are a different issue, but more often than not, the people actually fighting the war and putting their lives at risk aren't the ones who cause the problems in the first place. So yes, if humans so choose, we could avoid war. It is absolutely possible. But the fact is, humans will not stop doing evil. And when someone else commits evil against our own country, then we have to have a force to defend against that evil. The demands are not going to stop. So that tough love is a way of testing who is going to be able to stand up to the real demands in the real world. That resilience that you need to be able to develop is non-negotiable. At the same time, you also see people come back from military service disturbed, mentally ill. And even those who came back apparently mentally well, was there residual harm that they don't realise exists? Often there is. This is where the difficulties of solving psychological problems become so nuanced and so complex. It is not just theoretically but practically possible for human beings not to cause other suffering, but the facts are that human beings always will cause suffering. That is just reality. life won't stop being hard. And inevitably, we're actually violating natural law by committing evil against each other and causing others suffering. So if the world collectively chose to stop causing others suffering, then yes, it would practically be possible for us to eliminate many of the problems we experience. But in reality, that's simply not going to happen. Something else on which I've been reflecting recently is how people often equate tough love to compassion. And you'll sometimes hear of people reflecting on their childhood experiences in which they were physically punished by their parents or by teachers at school, or you may even hear about certain treating professionals or employers treating people with tough love and just saying, pull your socks up, put your chin up, life wasn't meant to be easy, get on with it, regardless of their suffering. And people sometimes come back thinking that that's compassion. Well, if you were doing something wrong, like you were a criminal and it was perhaps the police or the parole officer or someone who was tasked to help you change your criminal behaviors, who was saying, I know that you can do better and I'm not going to stop until I help you see that you should do better, then perhaps there is merit to that, because in the end, you chose those behaviors and you landed yourself in jail. So if someone truly cares about you, then they are going to be telling you what you need to hear. You chose to be here, but if you're going to come out the other end and you're going to change, then it is up to you. But think about the types of people who haven't caused suffering to other people, who haven't committed horrible atrocities, but are suffering psychological problems nonetheless. Yes, it may be that they have a role in those problems without realizing it, but you cannot treat every person with the same problem the same way. There are differences. And how do you think somebody would respond if they were to walk in expecting compassion and to simply be told to suck it up and deal with it? Someone who was by and large not a mischief maker and was just looking for compassion and looking for guidance on how they could change that part of their life. And even someone who has committed atrocities and who has done the wrong thing, if they came into my practice, they would still be treated with compassion. But it is my duty as a helping professional to also tell someone what they need to hear and to tell them, you have been responsible for committing these acts, but you are capable of getting yourself out of this position and of changing. In the end, this is why I'm critical of the human race. Not because I want to hate it, not because I'm hateful toward it just for the sake of being hateful. I believe humans are capable of changing. I believe in their capacity to do good. Often you need to tell people that they are capable of doing good in that way in order to encourage them to do so. So in conclusion, it's hard to say definitely whether tough love is always good or always bad or sometimes acceptable, sometimes not. There are nuances to it, but it is a question that is constantly worth pondering. And as a counsellor, as someone who has a duty to know as much as possible about how the mind works because I work with it on a daily basis, I will never stop learning about this. And it's worth everyone to constantly ponder these types of questions and ask whether a particular approach is the best or whether there's something else that we could be doing. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As per usual, if you have any concerns about yourself or somebody else, please seek professional advice. And if you are interested in something that you've heard on the program and you'd like me to discuss a particular topic, or you'd like to be a guest or a collaborator, please contact me. I'd love to hear from my audience. And until next time, take care.